as an investor for net lease, it's very important to understand who your tenant is. Who is behind that signature on the piece of paper, right? Is it a 10-unit operator where if they have a problem with their operation and file for bankruptcy, you've got an empty building?
Hey, welcome back everyone to another episode of Eat, Sleep, and Invest. I'm your host, Brian Driscoll, and I'm here with Dan Lewkowicz. What's going on, Dan?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Hey guys, today, so a lot of times we're talking like singles, multifamily, stuff like that in the real estate space. Dan specializes in commercial and specific types of commercial. So Dan, why don't you give us a little background on everything you do?
Yeah, sure. So I do definitely have an extensive background in the single family, residential space. I flipped a good number of homes starting in kind of like the middle of the last recession, which was a great time to be involved in single-family house flipping. I'm currently the senior director here at Encore Real Estate Investment Services. We're a boutique net lease investment sales firm. So what I do is I help buyers and sellers all over the country transact specifically in net lease properties. And what those are is, typically there's a few different types, but if we look at like kind of the bread and butter single tenant net lease deals, those are properties where the actual rent that's collected from the tenant is net to the landlord. Because in contradistinction to multifamily, where you have, your rental income, right? And then you have a whole slew of expenses like insurance, property management, maybe eviction costs. You've got things like, putting on a new roof or sweeping the parking lot, doing the landscaping, mowing the grass, plowing the snow, all those things. In a net lease property, the bottom line is actually your rental number because the taxes are covered by your tenant, the insurance is covered by your tenant, all property maintenance and management is covered by the tenant. So whatever you collect from the tenant in rent, that goes in your pocket net to you. That's typically a net lease property. I also sell a lot of shopping centers, which have different lease structures, but in many cases in the shopping center as well, the landlord may be paying for those things like sweeping the parking lot, cutting the grass, painting the building, but in most cases, they're recouping those expenses from the tenant through their what's called CAM charges or common area maintenance charges.
Yeah, that's pretty solid too. So net lease, because like me, I deal with single family houses. The roof goes, I pay for it. And I'm hoping I make enough cash flow to keep the place profitable versus you're saying net leases. If that was a commercial building, the roof goes, they're still paying me the same amount of rent, but the tenant's the one fixing the roof.
Yeah, and that's the case for what we call an absolute triple net lease, right? So taxes, insurance, common area maintenance, roof, structure, parking lot, that's all on the tenant, exactly like you just described. Now, there are other leases. I'm dealing with one literally right now. I just got an email from someone reaching out saying, hey, Dan, I've got a Rite Aid I want to sell. That's a whole nother topic because Rite Aid filed for bankruptcy this weekend. But that's a double net deal. So in that specific example, the tenant is responsible for taxes, insurance, just general maintenance, but they're not responsible for things like roof, structure, and in that case, HVAC. And by the way, it's not standardized. You really have to have a good brokers and help you read the lease because some leases will say, okay, landlord is responsible for roof and structure. Some leases will say roof, structure, HVAC, as well as parking lot. So there's a lot of little nuances in our field that are very important to pay attention to.
So, and that brings up a question too. So we got net leases. Then you said that's a double net lease, and then you got triple net lease, right? Like,
yep.
What are all the different, what is all this?
So, okay, great question. So the general difference between a double net lease and what I call an absolute triple net lease, and I'll tell you why I'm adding that word absolute in there in a minute. The difference is that in an absolute triple net lease, every single thing is a tenant responsibility. Again, taxes, insurance, common area maintenance, roof, structure, parking lot, everything. In a double net lease, the roof and structure is the landlord responsibility, and some double net leases have parking lot and HVAC as well. So there can be little variances there within double net. Now, the reason I say absolute triple net, and I just got into a big debate with somebody about this, is because unfortunately in our industry, in the parts of the western side of the country, they actually call a double net lease triple net, which is like, for me, is like, no, don't do that, right? So in order to do that, I differentiate. I say double net and absolute triple net. To let you know, when I say absolute triple net, I'm not going to let you, get confused and think that's a double net lease. That's an absolute triple net lease. Every single responsibility is on the tenant.
So if I'm a property owner, I want this absolute triple net lease. That's what I'm shooting for.
Absolutely. Now, keep in mind, you're going to pay a little bit of a cap rate premium, right? You're going to be having to pay a lower cap rate. If we're comparing apples to apples and one lease is absolute triple net and one is double net, there's going to be a little bit of a premium you're paying on that absolute triple net. The advantage is, I have a closing today of a Burger King in Virginia. My client has owned it for going on 16 years. They've never seen the property before. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know how to get there. They don't know anything about it because they've been getting their rental checks like clockwork every single month. And you know what? If the roof is bad, they don't care because the tenant has to be responsible for that. Now, as a caveat, I tell all my clients, I understand you love these absolute triple net deals because they're coupon clippers and you can sit on the beach and do whatever you want and get your check, every month like clockwork. But I still advise you every couple of years, even if you're not going to go out there, send somebody out there, spend $500 or $1,000 for a property condition assessment because you want to make sure that the tenant is keeping up on that maintenance. I have seen situations. I sold a CVS this year, absolute triple net CVS, which is great because not all of them are absolute triple net. But when we went to sell it, the buyer went to the property and found $275,000 in deferred maintenance, right? And the seller was like, I haven't been to the property in 20 years. We acquired it in 97. I was there one time. And, he had to work with the buyer and give a big discount. Whereas if he would have just, spent $500 or $1,000 every couple of years, he would have been able to send a letter to CVS. Hey, CVS, per the lease, okay, per this section of the lease, you have 30 days to fix this roof, 30 days to fix this parking lot. Otherwise, you're in default. CVS would have done it. So I advise people to err on the side of caution in that regard.
That is smart. Even on any property too, like even single families, multis too, get to the properties because you're trusting other people with your investment.
Yeah, I think that with if you're hiring an inspector to do a property condition assessment, like I'll give you a great example. I sold a shopping center in September in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we were at the property and the buyer was there, the seller was there, I was there, the inspector was there, and the buyer says, hey, can I get up on the roof? And the inspector says, you're not using my ladder to get up on the roof because of liability. And I said to him, listen, you can get up on that roof all day long, right? But you're a doctor, right? If this was, an x-ray, you'd know exactly what to see and exactly what to look for. We're going to get you a report here in 72 hours from the inspector that's going to have every single square inch of that roof photographed. And more importantly, he's going to point out every single little problem, right? So my point is just that an inspector is going to be able to do a better job than an investor. And they'll be able to give you today an incredible report with diagrams and pictures and, estimates of costs of repair. So I tell people, it's important to rely on professionals in every regard. And this is no exception.
That's a really good point too. Inspectors actually kind of they make almost every property look bad because they go into so much detail. Yeah. So it's like, leave it up to the pros because I'm an investor. I know some things, but I don't know all the nitty gritty of what to look for, but those guys, that's their job.
And if you're the buyer, you want when I was flipping houses, I rarely got inspections because I didn't listen to my own advice, but we were dealing with investments where it made sense. We're talking about $2, $3, $5, $10, $20 million buildings, right? It's a nominal cost to get an inspector there. And it's very important. I always recommend, hey, let's go with the inspector that's going to, show us everything. I know it might be scary, but I'd rather you see everything and then be able to make an informed decision. Number one. Number two, you may be able to have some leverage with the seller and, go to the seller and say, hey, look, $112,000 of repairs that are necessary in the next couple of years. I understand you don't want to pay for things that I'm going to benefit from in the future. Let's split it down the middle. But if you don't have that inspection report, it's hard to do. So I think that's a very important part of the due diligence process.
Yeah, I agree. Now, what all do you handle? So you can sell properties. Do you handle the leasing, finding tenants, things like that? Or explain to me all what you do.
So I believe that any specialist or expert in a field is not going to be a generalist, right? If I've got a problem with my liver and I go to my generalist, he's not going to be the best person. And certainly if I go to my heart guy, he's not going to be the best person at all, right? I want a specialist. So I specialize exclusively in net lease investment sales. I don't do any leasing brokerage whatsoever. In fact, I'm in the middle of a deal right now where I'm selling a vacant property and the buyer needed to find a new tenant. I didn't go and I could have done it, but it's not my specialty. Instead, I reached out to one of my colleagues who's the best guy in that market. And we were working together with him so that he can help find that tenant. So, the answer to your question is I specialize exclusively in net lease investment sales. I am definitely a resource. I can help you find the right person to lease out the property. We have leasing specialists here, but that is not what I specialize in.
So now people come to you if they want to buy a property or sell a property or both?
Both. Absolutely both.
Okay. And mainly you're talking Because commercial is a broad phrase. Elaborate a little bit on what areas you deal with in the commercial space.
Yeah, so in general, it's essentially net lease, like I mentioned. But in terms of what I'm referring to, like as specific examples, I'll give you great examples. Guy just emailed me 5 minutes before we started this podcast, has Rite Aid, wants to sell it. So I sell a lot of pharmacies, Rite Aids, Walgreens, CVS's. I sell a lot of shopping centers, so multi-tenant retail or multi-tenant retail and office, typically between 10,000 and 150,000 square feet, but it doesn't have to be within those parameters. I sell a lot of medical office buildings. There are medical office buildings that have absolute triple net structured leases. I deal a lot with those. I sell discount retailers like dollar stores, Family Dollars, Dollar Generals, those types of products. Childcare. So these are all, typically double net or absolute triple net deals. So like right now we have under contract what's called The Learning Experience, which is a large, early education provider. They've got a good number of locations, which is very important. And a little bit of industrial, but mostly I stay on the retail side. I sell a lot of QSR, which is quick service restaurant. I mentioned a couple Burger Kings I'm working on. I have a Taco Bell I'm bringing to market, a Wendy's as well. So those are really the assets that I specialize in. And I work with buyers and sellers, and I handle the entire process. Right, we do everything in the transaction from soup to nuts. So if you need a lender, we'll get you a lender. You need a real estate attorney, we'll get you a real estate attorney, an inspector, Alta surveyor, an environmental person. I mean, because this is all we do, we have the resources, and we're a relatively small shop. We've got 37 agents, but last year we did $985 million in transactions, 320 deals in 43 different states. So because we do that day in and day out, we're grinding, we're experts at what we do, we have the resources and the network to assist our clients in any way possible.
That's pretty solid volume. I think that's interesting too, because I think a lot of people think like Burger King actually owns the building. Like all the big corporations own the buildings, which in most of them they don't, right?
Right. And what's fascinating to me is like you bring up a great point. If I'm driving down the highway and again, I look at one Burger King on one exit and then I go 20 miles down the road, I see another Burger King. They look the same. They were both built, let's say they're the 2018 prototype, right? They look the same. Everything to me, it seems similar traffic counts, similar, ingress and egress. I would think if I didn't know any better that these properties are worth exactly the same. But what I don't know is, I don't know, what is the lease term remaining? Is this a 20-year deal or are there 3 months left on the lease, right? Is this tenant a tenant that has 300 locations or is it a 10-unit operator, right? Because if I'm buying a deal, I want the deal that's guaranteed by, and we'll talk about this a little more, by the 300-unit operator, not the 10-unit operator, right? Is that operator doing $2 million in sales and paying $100,000 in rent, so they've got a 5% rent to sales ratio? Or are they doing $1 million in sales and paying $100,000 in rent, so they've got a 10% rent to sales ratio? These are all important questions that differentiate one property from the next. And one of the points I just touched on, which is important, is that as an investor for net lease, it's very important to understand who your tenant is, who is behind that signature on the piece of paper, right? Is it a 10-unit operator where if, they have a problem with their operation and file for bankruptcy, you've got an empty building, right? Or is it Carroll's Corporation with 1,100 locations where if that location goes dark because the tenant is having a problem at that location, they're still on the hook. Keep in mind, when you drive down those roads and you see those vacant Walgreens and vacant Rite Aids, many of them are dark. There's still lease term remaining, and the tenant, believe it or not, is still paying rent and supposed to be, maintaining the building, which sometimes they don't do. But my point is that that's because they signed a guarantee that's backed by a large number of locations. And that's very important.
Yeah, that's really important too, because you're basically guaranteeing your income. Because if you get the small person, like, how long do they sit vacant? Like, what's the average property like that sit vacant?
It really depends because a 15,000 square foot Walgreens, granted, it's probably A+ real estate. It's probably at a main-on-main intersection, at a lighted intersection, right? But 15,000 square feet, that's a relatively large size, right? You have a very small number of tenants that will backfill into that location. If it's a Burger King that's 2,400 square feet or 2,900 square feet, and the area will support coffee, fast food, maybe car wash, it's probably going to be easier to re-tenant. But I'll tell you this, I don't like to promise things that are not going to happen. And I want to let people know that, in this type of single tenant net lease world, if you do lose a tenant, you have to factor for a significant amount of time. How long is it? Depends on the property. But, 12, 18 months minimum, especially if you're going to have to do any type of build out for the new tenant that's coming in. And then keep in mind, you're going to have to pay leasing commissions as well to whoever brings you that tenant.
The difference of buying a property when you got 3 months left on their lease or 20 years too. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, what's interesting, this is a value add strategy in net lease. It's a strategy called the blend and extend. I love this strategy. So I look back at my days when I was flipping a ton of houses, right? I had to buy something that had a problem or had a lot of problems. I had to put in time and money and energy and risk. And then I had to make the property better in order to create equity, right? So that equity it was a result of hard work, time, money, risk, ingenuity, energy, all those things. Now in net lease, I'll give you a perfect example. I had a deal in Ohio. This was a Walgreens, right? So this Walgreens, I love this example. At the time, they were paying $290,000 in rent, but they only had like 10 months left on their lease. So $290,000 in rent. This was a couple years ago. They were paying $290,000 in rent. They got 10 months left on their lease. That was probably like a 9 cap deal, let's say. So that deal was worth about $3.222 million. So let's remember that number, $3,222,000. So my client didn't know what to do. He said, Dan, let's sell it. I said, no, we're not selling this. You're going to go to Walgreens and you're going to tell Walgreens, I want a new lease, a 10-year lease, whatever lease they'll give you, the longest lease they'll give you. They're going to say, we'll give you a new lease, but we're going to reduce the rent. And he's like, why would I do that? I'm making $290 a year. Like, why would I reduce my rent? I said, trust me, go to them, see what they say. So he calls me back a couple days later. He goes, I talked to Walgreens. They said they'll give me a brand new 10-year lease, but they're going to reduce the rent from $290, right, to $225, $65,000. So you guys might think I'm crazy. I said, go for it 8 days a week. And again, you might think I'm crazy because this guy's going from $290 a year to $225. Why is that worth it? Well, the reason is at the time cap rates were a little lower, but with a new 10-year lease at this location, even at $225,000, the cap rate was still approximately 5.85. Okay, so at that cap rate, the property is worth $3,846,000. Right? What was that number I told you to remember before?
322.
Exactly. So $3,222,000. So let's take our current value, all right, with the blend and extend, and we'll subtract the original value. We've got an equity. I don't know if it's going to be backwards or not. It is, but $624,000 plus dollars. Right? He didn't renovate the property. He didn't hire his contractors. He didn't put in any money. He didn't even have any risk. All he did was change the piece of paper that's behind the deal. He did that blend and extend, right? He blended some terms, which means he lowered the rent. He extended the lease, and he built up $624,000 of equity in his property. I love that.
So then you're saying the sale price is dictated based on rental income plus lease term.
Oh, absolutely. Those are two of the major factors, because as a buyer, a deal with 10 months left, that's very risky. A deal with 10 years left, much more stable. The market is willing to pay a significantly lower cap rate, which equates to a significantly higher price for that longer term, so much so that it offsets the decrease in rental income.
Yeah, and that's a win-win. The tenant gets a deal, you get more money, and the guy buying it has peace of mind for like the next 10 years.
Exactly.
Who are your ideal clients? Like who buys these types of properties?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess first of all, I typically work more with sellers than buyers. A lot of my deals, majority of my deals, I represent the buyer as well. I build relationships, and especially if someone's bought from me before and we've worked together, I'm constantly finding them deals. So I would say that my ideal client is more so a seller who has a property, and he or she either wants to know what is it worth or can we sell this, right? On the buy side, if somebody is a serious buyer who has parameters and is going to pull the trigger when they find something that meets those parameters, that's my ideal buyer client. So, I'm really just here to add value to both those types of avatars, so to speak, and help them, accomplish their goals. What's interesting is that different clients have different goals. I have clients that are, I want to maximize dollars, and I have clients that are, I want to minimize headaches. So depending, I obviously always advise my clients, like that Walgreens example, as to what I think is best for them, even if it doesn't mean selling. However, if a client has specific needs and it vocalizes them to me, I will conduct myself in a way to maximize whatever is most important to them.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm wondering more along the lines, is it like attorneys looking for passive income, doctors, real estate investors? Like, who's buying the Burger King down the road?
I mean, I've sold to publicly traded real estate investment trusts, right? I've sold to people who are buying their first building. That typically I'm dealing with an individual who is placing capital for him or herself and or their family or friends. And they may have anywhere from 3 to 10 of these properties on the buy side, right? I also work with individuals. I've sold shopping centers, for example, to individuals who have their own funds. They raise capital from investors and then place it. And then in terms of, that would be on the buy side. On the sell side, I mean, I've sold for people that have, one property. I love helping people in any way I can. When they have one property, I get a little disappointed because I'm like, man, we just built this relationship and like, we're not going to work together again, but you never know. But, anywhere from somebody owned this shopping center as a family for 40 years and now they want to sell it. It's been in the family. This is not their profession. They're not experts at it. They want me to handle everything. They have tons of questions, which is great. All the way up to, I sold last year almost $50 million of real estate for one client. And he had a huge portfolio. What's amazing to me is that I contacted him via email about a Wendy's, and he asked me to sell the Wendy's and didn't tell me anything about the rest of his portfolio. Super down to earth. We've made a great relationship. Absolutely love this guy. And as time went on, he started telling me like, hey, I've got more stuff. And then eventually he hired me to list $47 million worth of resorts here in Michigan. So you really never know who you're talking to. And I love it because like you said before we got on the show, one of the reasons you do this is to learn. And honestly, like every day I'm learning. My education in commercial real estate increases every single day because I listen to my clients and I learn from my clients. And, I love it. I feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I feel like Michael Jordan playing basketball. Like I love what I do.
That's cool. I do have a question I just thought about when you're saying that too. Off topic. These properties, do they own the land?
Good question. So there's multiple ways it could happen. In what's called a fee simple deal, that's where the owner owns the building and the land. That's like the most vanilla, easiest, desirable way to look at it. There's something also that's called a ground lease where you own only the ground. And the tenant typically built the building. Now, the advantage there is that if the tenant built the building and you own the ground, then, your rent's probably going to be a little lower. But the point is that if that tenant leaves, you get the building. And the tenant already invested the dollars in building those buildings. So there are a lot of pharmacies that are like that. So that tenant invested, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million in building the building, much lower likelihood that they're going to leave. Now, the downside there is that as I think a lot of people know, obviously there are tax benefits in real estate investing, and one of them is depreciation. However, the IRS allows you only to depreciate a building and not land. So if I have fee simple ownership of net lease property, if I own the building and the ground, I can depreciate the building but not the ground. If I own a ground lease, my ownership is 100% ground and 0% building, no depreciation there. Now, there's something else which is interesting. It's not a well-known topic in my industry. In fact, every time I list one of these, 80% of my time is spent explaining to people who call what exactly it is we're selling. So this is called a leasehold interest, okay? So in a leasehold interest, you've got 3 people. You've got the building owner, right? You've got the ground owner, and then you've got the guy that's sandwiched in between. It's also called a sandwich lease. So that person has a leasehold interest. So for example, I had a Family Dollar. So Family Dollar was paying the guy that had the leasehold interest, right? Let's call it $150,000 a year. The guy who had the leasehold interest is now paying the ground owner $50,000 a year and pocketing the difference. So in this case, in the case of a leasehold interest where the person who has the leasehold interest owns the building, the tenant is renting from them, then they're paying the ground holder the ground lease. Guess what? Great advantage here. Your ownership is 100% building. We've manufactured this type of ownership where your ownership consists of all building and no ground, 100% depreciable. So that's really cool. That's another type of ownership. Those are the 3 main types. and they are most common in the order that I described them. So fee simple, most common; ground lease, less common; leasehold interest, not common at all.
And you're saying that the sandwich lease, the least common, that guy's just a middleman, right? You got the building owner and you got the ground owner.
Well, no. So let me clarify, and I didn't explain it very eloquently at first because I realized that I was gonna make that little bit of I didn't want to make a miscommunication. So, and I'm glad you're clarifying. So in the leasehold interest situation, this investor owns the building but not the ground. Okay. And the tenant is renting from him. They're renting the building from him, but he has to pay the ground where the building sits. So his ownership is 100% building.
Okay, that makes sense. I get it.
Now, the thing there, though, is you have to make sure. So the problem, a lot of people don't like those deals because they're finite in ownership. And what I mean is that you have a lease from Family Dollar to you for your building, right? And let's say it's 20 years with 4 or 5 year options. And then you've got a lease with the ground holder that's 20 years, 4 or 5 year options. Very important for those two leases to be coterminous, for them to end at the same time, right? But however, at the end of those, what I say, 4 or 5 year options, at the end of those 40 years, you're done. You have no rights to anything. So in many cases, you have to demolish the building, or there's all kinds of things that could happen, or give it back to the ground holder. So, you have to understand that it's not like a fee simple deal. Like there's going to be an end to your ownership unless you work something out with the ground holder. So that's very important.
Yeah, it makes sense. A lot of people do like 99-year leases on this, huh?
They can, yeah. Yes, more common from what I've seen is like a 20-year lease with 4 or 5 year options. And again, the important thing is like, you have to make sure that if Family Dollar, let's say the 20 years is over and now Family Dollar has 4 or 5 year options. Well, if they exercise the option, you exercise your option. If they don't exercise your option, you don't have to exercise your option. You could, but you still have to pay the ground holder and then go find a new tenant. Or you can just walk away. So it's a different deal. It's not a vanilla cookie cutter deal like people are used to.
It's crazy complicated, man. There's a lot of moving parts there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, wait, let me ask you this. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Can I give you a couple?
Sure.
So I really love Think and Grow Rich. When I first saw it, I was like, this is like stupid, crazy. Like, what am I going to do? Just pretend that I'm making a lot of money and think about it in my head and then it'll happen? Yeah, that's what happens, right? I believe life is like 100% mindset. It really is. So that book is amazing. If you haven't read it, read it. If you've read it one time, you haven't really read it, so keep reading it. There's another great book if you're into sales. It's called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, I believe. It's all about, using, psychology in sales and in business. I love it. It's a great book. I know that a lot of your listeners and viewers are multifamily enthusiasts. Great book on multifamily. It's called Multifamily Millions by Dave Lindahl. Small blue book, but it's amazing. And I think those 3 books together, those are powerhouses. I recommend them. Obviously, 10X, great book. There's another one called The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Pappison from Keller Williams, who I respect very much. Great book as well. Yeah,
those are awesome good ones. Think and Grow Rich. It's probably one of the first success, like self-mindset books I've read. It's a good one.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Hey, what's the best way for people to reach out to you and connect?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I post content, I host events, do LinkedIn Lives all the time. So please follow me there. My first name is Dan, last name Lewkowicz, Lewkowicz. Again, Lewkowicz. I always love when people tell me, hey, I'm reaching out. I saw you on Brian's show. So shoot me a note there, connect, please. I would appreciate it. And then I'll give people my direct cell phone number in case you want to talk. If you have a property that you want evaluated, if you want to sell your property, if you've got a deal, I don't care if it's somebody else's deal, broker-wise, and you need an extra set of eyes on it, I'm always happy to help. If you're new, if you're experienced, you want to talk shop in real estate, I love making relationships and charting people's progress over time. It's very rewarding. My phone number is 248-943-2838. Again, 248-943-2838, and I would love to connect.
All right, guys. Hey, we'll put all that in the show notes, too. So, hit Dan up if you're looking to buy properties or you have properties you want to sell or get a valuation on, like he was saying. Hey, Dan, well, thanks for coming on, man. We appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. This was great.
Hey, thanks. And everyone listening, thanks for listening. Get out there and crush it. Close some deals. We'll talk next time. See you, Dan.
Bye.